All right, are y'all having a good time at Ag Day today?
Yes, sir.
Good. Well, we're glad to have y'all, and at this station we're talking about some plants and some of the different types of plants that produce our food. So do you recognize some of the plants that we have here? What is this plant?
Sunflower.
That's a sunflower. That's exactly right. And what about this that's in the jar here? Does anyone know what these are? Wheat. Very good, very good. And what about this? Corn. Very good. And what about this plant? Does anyone know what it is? Grain sorghum. Yeah. So what do all those plants have in common? Does anyone know what the common thing about all those plants is? What? They do have leaves, but I was thinking about what type of a plant they are. And these are all grain crops, okay? And so the definition of a grain is a hard, dry seed that can be fed to livestock or to humans, okay? And so all of those crops, all those plants that I mentioned are actually grain crops, or examples of grain crops. What is this plant right here? Does anyone recognize that plant? Yeah? What is it?
It's the cheeseburger.
It's a hamburger plant, yeah. Are hamburger plants real?
No.
No, they're not. Obviously, you know, hamburgers don't grow on plants like this, but certainly a lot of the things that we need to make a hamburger do come from plants, and a lot of grain is used to make all the things that we need to make a hamburger. And so if we start right here at the top of our hamburger bun, what is on top of those? Seeds, right? What kind of seeds though? What are they? Sesame seeds, yeah, here's a bunch of sesame seeds. And these sesame seeds are actually little grains, aren't they? So those are all grains because what? They're hard, dry seed, right, that we can eat. So that's actually what is an example of a grain. What's the next thing that we have on our hamburger? No. What's on? What are our sesame seeds on? They're on buns, right? So what are our buns made out of? What is this?
Wheat.
Yeah, and so our wheat is ground into flour, and that makes our breads and our buns, like our hot dog buns, our hamburger buns. What are some other things that we might eat that's made out of wheat? Does anyone have any other ideas? Bread, excellent. What about noodles? Does anyone like spaghetti?
Yeah.
Whenever we eat spaghetti, we're eating wheat. What about chicken noodle soup? Do you think that there's any grain or any type of wheat that would be in chicken noodle soup?
Yes.
Yeah, because it has the noodles in it, doesn't it? And so there's certainly a lot of wheat that's used in that. So then what's that next layer in the hamburger? What would be in there? Lettuce, pickles, onions, tomatoes maybe. So what types of plants are those? They're vegetables, right? And so what's the difference between a vegetable and a grain? What'd I say?
A vegetable, it does not grow on trees.
No, well, none of these are growing on trees, but a grain is a hard, dry seed. And so what'd we say this was? This was corn, right? And so whenever we eat corn, do we eat corn as a vegetable or do we eat it as a grain?
A grain.
How many of you think we eat it as a grain? How many of you think we eat it as a vegetable? Well, you're both right. It really depends on how we eat it. What are some of our favorite ways to eat corn? Do we like to eat it like this? No? Y'all don't like to eat corn on the cob? Yeah, sure you do. Okay, and so we peel this off and then we can eat this as a roasting ear, right? And so whenever we eat it like this, or maybe like this, we're eating corn as a vegetable, aren't we? Okay? But if we allow it to dry down and it becomes that hard, dry seed, this is probably our favorite way to eat it in that case, isn't it? What is this? Popcorn, yeah. And so whenever we're eating popcorn, we're actually eating it as a grain. Okay? What are some other ways that we might eat corn as a grain?
Well, as a grain,
Yeah.
we could pick it off and
So we might eat it. How about our corn chips? That would be a great example. Does anyone like tortillas? Corn tortillas, that's a great example of a way that we might enjoy corn as a grain. Sometimes we get sick, maybe we run a fever or we have a sore head or something like that, and so we might need to take an aspirin. Is there any corn in aspirin? Yeah, they use cornstarch to make that pill so that we'll have a big enough pill to swallow that medicine. And so a lot of our medicines, our medications, will have a little bit of corn in them. And so those are all very important parts of reasons that we'll use grain. So what's our next layer of this hamburger here? Any ideas? The meat, right? The meat patty. Is there any grain in meat? No, there's not any grain in our patty, but we certainly use a lot of our grain crops to feed livestock that are used to make that nutrient-dense, high-quality protein source that is our meat. And so about half of all the corn that's grown in the United States is used to feed livestock, and then the other half is used to feed feed ourselves. Whenever it comes to this crop, what did we say this was called? Grain sorghum. Okay, grain sorghum can be gone by a couple of different names. It can also be called milo, and it can also be called maize. But whenever you hear that term, grain sorghum, milo, or maize, they're referring to this plant right here. And this is a very important plant here in our county, in Nueces County, because we grow more of this crop than any other county in the United States. We lead the nation in the amount of grain sorghum that we produce. We grow about 140,000 acres of grain sorghum every year here in Nueces County. And so whenever you think about the size of an acre, that's about one football field, okay? And so we grow about 140,000 football fields of this plant every year. And we use the predominant amount of this as grain, as feed for livestock. We'll feed it to chickens, we'll feed it to pigs, we can even feed it to cattle, okay? And the grain sorghum, about 90% of that, like I said, is grown for feeding livestock, but humans can actually eat grain sorghum. What does this look like right here? Yeah, that looks like little pops of popcorn. But what is that really? It's popped sorghum. And so this is popped grain sorghum. And so we can actually eat popped sorghum just like we might eat popped corn. And it's very, very similar in taste and everything. It's just a much, much smaller kernel than what we would be used to if we were eating popcorn. But again, just like popped corn can be a very good, nutritionally healthy snack for us as long as we don't put too much butter or too much sugar on it. Our grain sorghum can also be a very healthy, nutritious grain and snack for us as popped sorghum. I'm sure a lot of y'all have heard of people that have food allergies. And some people have a food allergy to gluten. And people that have a food allergy to gluten are said to have celiac disease. That's about 1% of the population that has celiac disease, but there's a lot of other people that will have some gluten intolerances, and so they won't like to eat breads and cereals and cakes and things like that are made from plants like wheat. But they can eat all of those food types from grain sorghum. And so that's a real nice advantage that we have whenever we raise grain sorghum, is that it can be consumed by people that do have that food allergy to gluten. And so that's a very, very beneficial aspect of having grain sorghum. We grow so much grain sorghum here in Nueces County because it's a very high heat and drought tolerant crop. And so that makes it very well suited for our area here on the coastal bend, as compared to maybe some of the other crops that are maybe a little less drought tolerant, such as corn, that really needs a lot of moisture in relation to grain sorghum, and needs some cooler nights so that it can germinate and pollinate. So I wanted to talk about some of the different plant parts of some of these crops. And so here we've got, we talked about wheat a little bit, and what it goes into making our hamburger buns. The grain in a wheat plant actually is produced right here in this structure on the upper portion of the plant, and that's called the seed head. And so all of these up here, this is the seed head, and each one of these kernels has an awn that's coming out of it, but these are all the kernels are up in this portion of the plant. The plant will also have some leaves, and then it has the main stem and then the root system. Okay, and so this has been cut at the ground, so it no longer has the root system, and the leaves are gone from this. But this is the upper portion of the plant, is where that grain is produced. That is very similar to our grain sorghum plant, that also has that same structure in the upper portion of the plant, that's called the seed head. Okay, and that's what that looks like in an immature grain sorghum plant. Then it's got the leaves, and the leaves are used for the plant to be able to collect that sunlight and go through its photosynthesis process so it can produce its own food for the plant. Then we have the stalk, and then we have the root system. And the sorghum plant, like a corn plant, it has some brace roots, and then it has the root system that it needs to uptake moisture and the nutrients that are found in the soil. And so that's the structures of a grain sorghum plant. Our corn plant is a little different, isn't it, in the way that it's structured? What is this thing up here? Everybody always says this is wheat, but that certainly is not wheat, is it? Because we've already talked about our wheat plant and what that looks like. So what is this thing up here at the top? What's that called? Yeah?
Tassel?
It's called the tassel, okay? And that's a very important structure on our corn plant. Then we have, just like in our other plants, we have the stalk of the corn plant. We've got our leaves, and then we've got these things right here. What are they called? What are those called? Does anyone know? What did I say these were? What is this? Yeah. That's an ear. This is the ear of corn. That's exactly right. And within this ear, this outer layer, we've got the husk. And so we can peel that back. And what's under here? Corn, yeah. But what are these things that are starting to come out here? Anyone know what? No, the tassel is up at the top. And so down here, what do we have? Does anyone know what these are called? Yeah? The silks. That's exactly right. And so in order for corn to develop, we have to have that tassel at the top of the plant, and the job of that tassel is to produce pollen, okay? And so the pollen, the tassel produces the pollen, and it's the silk's job to catch that pollen. And so, believe it or not, every one of these kernels that we have on this ear of corn has a single silk attached to it. Okay? And so, in order for that kernel to fully grow and develop, it has to be pollinated. And so that pollen that's produced at this tassel has to fall down, and one of those silks has to catch it in order for that to develop. Have we ever eaten corn on the cob and ever noticed that there's a kernel missing? How many of y'all have done that? The reason that that kernel was missing is because that kernel didn't get pollinated. Maybe that silk was broken or damaged, or maybe that pollen just didn't fall on that silk, but that's what caused that kernel to be missing in there. And so pollination is very, very important for our corn producers. In order for them to produce a good high-yielding crop, they have to have good weather conditions in order for that corn to properly pollinate. And so that's always a concern that farmers have. And so whenever we have the very hot temperatures at night that we have in the coastal bend, it makes it a little bit more challenging for pollination to occur. And so that's why we grow a lot of grain sorghum, is because it's a little bit more heat tolerant and can do a little better. And so if we allow this plant to continue to grow, and if we don't pull these ears off and enjoy them as a vegetable, we can continue to allow them to mature and dry down into grain, okay? And each one of these grains are attached to a structure on this plant. What is this called? What is this? Does anyone know what that's called? Yes? No, what is this called that all the kernels of corn are attached to? Does anyone know? Yeah? You want to take it? No, yeah, these are all grain kernels, but what are the kernels attached to? They're attached to something called the cob, right? Okay? And so all of these kernels are attached to a cob. And we just came back from learning about the different types of equipment that farmers use. And one of the pieces of equipment that they used was called a combine, right? And they said that the reason that it was called a combine was because it combined two operations into one machine. It is able to harvest the crop, and then it's also able to thrash the grain out of the crop, okay? Before we had that machine that combined both of those operations in, there was more than one machine that was required. And so we got to get, in order for this to be used as a grain, we got to get all of this corn off of the cob. So do I have a volunteer that wants to work on getting this off of the cob? Okay, you can come up here and help me get this corn off of this cob. Yes, I guess. But this is what a combine looks like here, and that's the machine that we're talking about that you would use normally to get the corn off the cob. It would harvest those ears off of that stalk, and then they would go through the header like was described earlier, and then the harvester would thrash the grain off of that ear. And so if you want to work on that, you can probably put your hands together and kind of go like that really tightly, and you can start knocking the grain off of it. But why don't you come around to this side and do that? And you can show the class all the work that it would, right here, stand right here. There, you can take that and you can start to work on getting the grain off of it. So I've got two more left. You want to volunteer? Okay, come up here. And we've got the next innovation. So we started with hand shelling corn, and then we moved to another type of sheller, which would be a hand sheller. And now we're at the point where we have a modern day combine. So what I need you to do is don't hurt yourself. We're going to have to crank this, and we're going to have to spin this really, really fast. You're probably going to want to stand over here. Don't let go, because we don't want it to spin back around and hit you, okay? But you got to do it really, really quickly. You got to go. Get it started. Go really, really fast as you can.
Hold on, wait, I think I'm better with this.
You think you're going to be better that way? I think you need to turn the other way, though.
Okay.
Yeah, turn it clockwise.
This way?
Yes. Oh, you're getting it. Go. There you go. Keep going. There you go. She beat you. You don't have anything off of that one yet.
The cob is red and like white.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little low to the ground here.
Do you need
And
help?
so, no, we got it. So, here's that.
It feels like
Here's
deer
that cob.
corn.
Yeah, that's deer corn. Yeah. That's another use that we can have from it. Okay. You didn't get very far with your hand shelling. Let's see if I can. You want to do another one of those?
You're stronger.
So that's how they would hand shell that corn.
Dude, hold on. Wait, which way? Hold on.
Yeah. Right. Very good. You got it. Good job. All right. You want to pass those around? So that's the way that corn used to be shelled. There you go. And so now we have a combine which does all of that for us. And like they said, it's got a auger on the side of the machine, and there'll be a grain wagon that will pull up to it, and he'll offload all of that grain that gets filled into that combine off into that grain wagon, and then they can take that grain wagon to the edge of the field, and they'll fill up a truck, and they'll be able to haul it to their elevators or to their ports where it can be taken to be processed into feed for our livestock or food for ourselves.